progress.
It's not a question of stopping it so much as just keeping up with it.
At IBM, our work is related to the paperwork explosion.
Specifically to paperwork in an office.
Paperwork explosion.
There's always been a lot of paperwork in an office.
But today, there is more paperwork than ever before.
There's more than ever before.
Certainly more than there used to be.
In the past, there always seemed to be enough time and people to do the paperwork.
There always seemed to be enough time to do the paperwork.
There always seemed to be enough people to do the paperwork.
There always seemed to be enough time and people to do the paperwork.
But today, there isn't.
Today, there isn't enough time.
Today, there aren't enough people.
Yeah.
Today, everyone has to spend more time on paperwork. Management has to spend more time on paperwork.
Secretaries have to spend
More time on paperwork.
Companies have to spend more time
On paperwork.
Salesmen, brokers, engineers, accountants, lawyers, supervisors, doctors, executives,
teachers.
Office managers,
bankers,
foremen.
bookkeepers.
Everybody has to spend more time on paperwork.
Seems to me we could use some help.
So anyway, I understand that IBM has a cordless dictating unit.
I'd say that the IBM MTST can type 150 words a minute error-free.
That's remarkable.
The IBM Office Products Division representative explained how it worked. Dictation.
I understood that. But what did he mean by error-free dictation? I think I'll call him back.
IBM has always been one of the leaders in the field of office equipment.
Talked to a guy about a machine that IBM makes. It's called an MTST.
Install a whole line of IBM Office products throughout the office.
IBM can help you with the time it takes to do the paperwork.
With IBM dictation equipment,
I can get 4 times as much thinking recorded
as I can by writing it down, and twice as much as I can by dictating to a highly skilled secretary.
Now the IBM MTST here turns rough draft into error-free copy automatically at the rate of a page every 2 minutes.
Used systematically throughout an office, these IBM machines can increase people's productivity by 50%.
And for the thinking that requires printed distribution,
There's the IBM Selectric Composer.
IBM machines can do the work.
so that people have time to think.
Machines should do the work.
That's what they're best at.
People should do the thinking.
That's what they're best at.
Machines should work. People should think.
Machines
Should work.
people
Should think.
Machines should work. People should think.
So I don't do much work anymore. I'm too busy thinking.
Thank you. Is this on? You got me? That is one of my favorite pieces of corporate propaganda ever. A couple of things about that. That was done in 1963. You might have seen at the end that was Jim Henson did that. Jim Henson started his career doing corporate propaganda for IBM. He stayed with IBM throughout the 1960s and early 1970s, and in fact, the very first Muppets were introduced by IBM. The interesting thing about yeah. Wait, what did I say? What did I say? There's a great video if you Google YouTube. If you Google Cookie Monster YouTube IBM, or you'll find an amazing. It actually wasn't Cookie Monster in 1968. The very first Muppet appeared in a sales video for IBM, and the Cookie Monster eats a mainframe coffee machine, which brings it all back to Monki Gras, right? It's a great custom coffee machine, and it's a mainframe, and it has just amazing stuff, and at the end, the Cookie Monster blows up. The point is this. Design is not just about products, although products are important. We actually have viewed throughout our history design as a very holistic approach to how do we engage with humanity. And that is, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is we're no longer dealing, in the 1960s, we were dealing with a scared population. People were afraid of technology, and they were afraid of the change that technology might bring on humanity. Today, I don't know if it's scared, but we have two things. We have a pace of change today that is scary to many people. But what has happened today is we have a disparity. We have a disparity in access to technology. And this creates a huge design challenge. In the developed world, we have a disparity between the people in this room and the people who don't even know this room exists. And that manifests itself in the workplace every day. We saw some of the user research yesterday where somebody who works in an office, has worked in an office for 10 or 15 years, had trouble with list boxes, right? We may not love list boxes as a UI element, but none of us would have trouble navigating one. That disparity is a real design challenge, right? We have a disparity of access. IBM does a lot of work in Africa. I can tell you that in the developing world, not everybody has the access that we think. And they're accessing their systems in ways that are actually pretty foreign to us. They don't go through smartphones in Africa. They're going through old dumb phones, but they're still doing their banking using text and things like that. That's a design challenge that we have to meet. So anyway, just a couple of things from our past, and then I'm actually going to get to a little scorecard set of results from what I talked about last year. Last year was really the very beginning. We kicked off this rededication to doing great design across all of IBM in a very holistic fashion, from marketing and communications to architecture to products, hardware and software, and particularly in the software space, we had never developed a culture and a capability that scaled and did great software product design at scale. We're doing that. I'm going to give you an update on that, but just a couple of things from our past, and it relates to sharing. IBM is actually a pretty amazing company. I came to IBM 4 years ago. I came from an acquisition. When I first got to IBM, I'd done 3 startups over 30-some years. I remember when I sold my first startup in 1995, I sold it to a company that asked me if I wanted to come on board with them. I said, I will never go to work for a big company. They had 400 people. So 4 years ago, when I went to IBM, quite frankly, probably the last thing I ever would have predicted is that 4 years later I would be on this stage with this title at this company. It just never occurred to me. But what I have found and discovered and actually come to love about IBM, after we announced this initiative, I've had people from around the world contact me, people that I don't know, that have been inspired by what we're trying to do inside IBM. And they've turned me on to all sorts of amazing things from our past, like the information explosion video. Needless to say, that's not something that we trot out every day, but I do now because I love it, and it's beautifully designed. I mean, it's engaging, and it informs, and it enlightens, right? It enraptures. This is from 1966. There's some guys here from our Bubblegum lab in Germany. They ran across this, which is an IBM corporate policy, which is what apparently used to be issued, and it became the edict. This is from Thomas Watson Jr. Thomas Watson Jr. really was the inventor in many respects of the modern corporation. The way he foresaw after World War II that the way corporations would evolve and actually would become the drivers of our culture in many respects. That's what has come to pass. And he embarked on a design program in 1956 by hiring Elliot Noyes, who was an architect, and it was Noyes who actually brought together Ray and Charles Eames, Paul Rand, Eero Saarinen, Jim Henson, and a constellation of other designers. This was a great, this is a corporate edict that said, thou shalt design, and thou shalt love it. And in some areas of the company, we did that. Shortly after we announced our initiative, Jenny Rometty became CEO. Actually, she became CEO, and shortly thereafter, we announced this initiative. And one of the things that Jenny loves to talk about is in our heritage, we have this heritage. In fact, it goes back to our founder, Thomas Watson Sr., used to say, we want to encourage wild ducks. Now, I got to tell you, I'm sure that's a shock to you that we actually encourage craziness. In 1981, a guy named Ken White, who was a famous graphic artist, and he worked for IBM, he actually was the guy at IBM that had the Paul Rand relationship. So he became a mentee of Paul Rand, and his job was to travel around the world with Paul Rand for about a decade. Ken White created this poster. Ken is no longer with us. He passed away in the 1990s. But he created this poster based on this quote from Thomas Watson about we want to encourage the wild ducks in our company because they are the ones that keep us moving forward and keep us young. Something like that. So he created this poster. You can't see it very well here. But when Ken did this, which is just a beautiful, it's an iconic piece of graphic art in my opinion. But inside the wild duck, if you were up close, those are all a bunch of bullshit corporate phrases. And it's awesome. In our new studio in Austin, and I'll show you in a second, we have, I get an email from somebody in, I think, Indianapolis. And this guy, who is now retired, but it was his last year at IBM, and he wrote me, and he said, by the way, I've got what I think, he goes, I used to work with Ken White in Boulder, and I have what I think is the last mint condition of the Wild Ducks poster. Now, to appreciate this poster, the original graphic poster was 4 foot by 8 foot. It's massive. It's beautiful. And he said, I want to give that to you because, you're carrying on the flame or whatever. That's sharing to me. It is an amazing culture of sharing that we have inside of IBM, that people have these marvelous historic artifacts, and they actually want to put them in service of continuing a great legacy. So we actually had a very high-res camera photo this poster, and then we made it massive. It's about a 12-foot by 24-foot version of just the top part of the poster, and it forms the wallpaper in one of the conference rooms that we have in our new studio in Austin. Anyway, just wanted to share that with you. I'm going to blow through a lot of information here. A lot of this stuff is online. If you'd like to talk about any of it further, I'm happy to do so at the rest of the conference. But I wanted to give a scorecard of what I talked to you guys about last year and let you know about what we're trying to do at IBM, which is to change a 400,000 person company completely pivot them and get them away from talking about, starting the conversation with the SCA integration and actually starting it with who's the user and what do they want to do. Changing the vocabulary to something like that is a pretty big pivot, and that's what we're trying to do. And so I kind of talked about last year that we're attacking it with going in three ways. We've got to deal with people, we've got to deal with places, and we've got to deal with how we practice design. On the people front, kind of what is a designer? I agree with everything that's been said. Especially as an entrepreneur, I can tell you that a great generalist will beat a great specialist every time in terms of competing in the modern world. No doubt. The problem is, as has also been mentioned, they are unicorns in the world. We are unicorns in the world, right? So you have to somehow figure out how do we scale this generality. So we actually created some subgroupings of how we think about the subspecialties of design. User experience designer, which itself is kind of a unicorn, that's kind of a generalist description. User researcher, visual designer. A design developer, one of the most important new skills today, that melding of front-end development, understanding of the back-end and full stack, and an appreciation for, spending 10 hours to get rounded corners. And obviously industrial design for our hardware group. And our goal then is obviously find every great generalist that we can, but find great specialists too and help make them T-shaped. So that's what we try to do, and we're recruiting from places that IBM's never been before. So we've got an amazing relationship with Rhode Island School of Design, the D School at Stanford. David Kelly and IDEO are strategic partners of ours in this whole initiative. David Kelly we were talking about 6 months ago, and he was saying, how's it going? Where are you? And I said, well, we've done this, we've educated this many people. And he goes, the great thing about culture change, he goes, in order to affect culture change, you only have to get 25% of your people. And then he goes, wait a second, that's still 100,000. So his point was lost. Parsons, as I said, Pratt, SCAD. We're also going out to industry. About 2/3 of the 1,000 or so designers that we'll be hiring over a 5-year period, about 2/3 will come direct from university and about 1/3 from industry. We'd love more from industry, but designers are very hard to come by. But we've gotten some great ones. A former Frog Fellow, 20 years with Frog. She was a Frog Fellow and got so inspired by what we were trying to do that she came and joined us. The senior user researcher from the Mayo Clinic, overall software solutions at the Mayo Clinic, just some phenomenal people. We also just opened a 50,000 square foot product design studio in Austin, Texas. This is one of the largest product design studios in the world, and it's modeled after a design language that we tested in our New York City studio around collaboration, as well as 25,000, about half of it is modeled after what's been done at Stanford. It was a collaboration between IDEO, Stanford, Steelcase, and IBM to figure out a completely new design language for how creative spaces ought to be and how flow ought to occur. I think somebody yesterday talked about the fact that, hey, look, just putting your headphones on or just closing your door, that doesn't work. But you do need to sometimes get away from it. What we found is that about 1/3 of the time developers develop, about 1/3 of the time developers collaborate, and about a third of the time they're doing managerial and or other work kind of stuff. How do you create a space that becomes that dynamic? And that's what we've tried to do. It's a beautiful facility. Just thought I'd throw up a few shots of kind of what we've built. The 8th floor of it is very much an homage to our past. That's Elliott Noise there. It's actually some great Kodak prints of Noise actually going through a prototyping session of one of the early System 360 control boards. This is an example of some of our corners to really bring that heritage, but do it in a very modern way. It's not a great picture, but in the same way, that's the top edge of that poster. When Jenny Rometty, our CEO, came with her entire senior leadership team, she said, if I could be so bold, I think we're going to change the world in this space. There is a massive commitment at IBM to create a design language that not only transcends our company, but transcends the world. Once you do that, you have to figure out how to educate people, how to spread the gospel, right? So we came up with a pretty interesting concept, I think, called Design Camp. And the faculty of our design camp are our global studio leaders, and these are some of the most talented designers in the world. Adam Cutler is an award-winning designer that's built stuff with the Children's Hospital of Boston that won a couple of design awards last year. Worked on City Forward, which won a Webby last year. Denise Burton is the fellow from Frog. Doug Powell, past president of the American Institute of Graphic Artists. If any graphic artists in the room, Doug is kind of a rock star. Being president of that organization is pretty cool. Todd Wilkins down there was the former user researcher at the Mayo Clinic. We put our new hires through a 3-month design camp. And this is based, about half of it is based on kind of made up but sort of real world case studies. And the second half is a time-boxed 6-week effort where we break people into 5-person teams where they're actually working on real world deliverables that the business plans on getting done later that year. We had 60 people in our design camp last summer, and we had 35 new graduates start in January. It's a massive undertaking. Give you a sense of how that happens. We then start thinking about how do you share craft across the team, right? And so we developed a 1-week design camp experience for our product teams. Now this is senior leadership from the design, product management, and engineering come together in our studio in Austin, and for a week we practice design thinking principles and methods and practices. We stand up and do empathy maps and user experience journeys, all of the stuff that Laisa showed yesterday. We educate everybody on. Product management, engineering absolutely have a huge seat at the table of design. Everybody has to be bought into this. And so we spend a lot of time in a multidisciplinary way collaborating around projects using design thinking as the basis. And by the way, that has now become the basis for the way all of our strategic product initiatives are developed. The agile development practices come in underneath it. We've done some interesting integration there. We then started hearing a lot that, okay, this is great for me, but I'm not getting a lot of support at the executive level. So we started in October running Design Camp for Execs. This is a one-day experience. In this picture, you'll actually see people that a lot of you guys might know at IBM. Robert LeBlanc is in there, one of our senior vice presidents, a direct report to Jenny. Many of his general managers. So Marie Week is in there. She's the general manager of all of the middleware products. Christoph Kleckner is there, general manager of all the Rational products. And they come and they spend a day and they are up at the Post-its. They're doing empathy maps and user experience journeys, and they're learning about design thinking, and they're learning how to create an empathic connection with our users of our products. We believe that there is a shift going on. It's not going to be a revelation to anybody in this room, but there's a shift going on where the power of who buys is shifting to the user, even in enterprises. We don't think it's a B2C world. We think enterprises are more complex. So we really try to teach our designers how to understand not just how an individual is doing their job. The interesting thing about enterprise software, and the thing that makes enterprise software so complex, is not that the software is more complex than, say, Facebook's code base. The issue is that the system within which the software is used is always more complicated than the system in which a piece of consumer software is used. And it's the understanding of that context of use that makes all the difference, and it creates all of the headaches for an enterprise software designer. Last year at Monki Gras, I talked about the fact that we've come up with a new approach, that you can't dictate great outcomes, you can only prepare for them. And I talked a little bit about a military notion called commander's intent, which is how do you, for very large teams, I think, by the way, I think this whole meme around two pizza teams is hurtful. Let me say this real quick. This whole notion about two pizza teams and innovation, I think, is a bunch of malarkey. And I think it's hurtful for this reason. The world, especially the enterprise world, is more complex than that, as I just said. And by reducing the optimal team that is needed to innovate in a complex space, lets everybody else off the hook. Oh, I'm on a team with 50 people. I read this thing about a two-pizza team. Our problem is my company is screwed up. It lets us off the hook. Some problems are hard. It's easy enough to say, I'm going to build the world's best electric car. By the way, it's going to be the world's best car. It's just going to happen to be electric. That's easy. Hell, a one-slice team can figure that out. But I promise you that the team that executed on the Tesla took a hell of a lot more than two pizzas to feed, and you couldn't reduce it to that. It's the same thing with much of the work that we do at IBM. So the issue is, how do we actually, in a complex, large, distributed team context, how do we do great work? Now that is an interesting question to me. And so we developed this notion that it was based on communicating clear conceptual models, that it's about decisions, not about process, and that transparency was paramount to everything. We call this IBM design thinking. We broke it down into 6 very specific experiences that we worry about. Discover, if you're a web-based, or install, if you're on-prem. First use, it's something that IBM's done a really bad job, and quite frankly, we're not alone in that. The first use experience of almost all enterprise software sucks. Everyday use, it's something that we kind of have in our wheelhouse. Worrying about upgrade, worrying about maintenance. And by the way, something that you guys should appreciate is we are now worrying about our APIs like never before. And we believe that the API economy, so-called, pervades not just the cloud, but also on-prem and private cloud properties as well. You're going to see a huge commitment to modern REST-based APIs by IBM that you've never seen before across the breadth of our portfolio. So we take these 6 experiences, we mold them into a thing called design thinking. Design thinking is a known thing, kind of the father of design thinking. We're David Kelly and Bill Moggridge. David is now the head of the D School at Stanford. They're one of our strategic partners in all this effort, and we do a lot of work with them. And we put some very tactical pillars around that. We call that IBM design thinking. And just real quick, the pillars that we put around it are hills. That's a way to focus the group and communicate the mental model, what we're trying to achieve. Sponsor users, which is a way to insert tactically and tangibly insert real people into the process. Too much software development is based on personas. It's the wrong way to go about it. Real people are who you should build software for, not personas that are abstractions of those real people. And finally, playbacks give us the transparency. Give you an example of what a hill is. In the past, we might have said we're going to work on disaster recovery. Today, we would say data center operators can recover from a disaster with a recovery time objective of less than 6 hours and a near zero recovery point objective. It's still a very big hill, but it's very specific and it's rooted in the needs and the desires of our user. Let me tell you, a team can rally around that like crazy. We actually had started one of our products with the former hill, and after coming to design camp, the head of engineering felt like we could have saved something like 10 man-years of development that had been executed over the previous 3 months had we articulated the hill as it was on the right. Sponsor users, just here's an example of people that we've used. They are real people at real clients. They're also real people inside IBM. And playback artifacts, we always talk about stories. Playbacks are a very special thing. You can think about them in the context of Agile. We've given them a very specific definition, but we do the things that you do. We talk about the users and then the personas that represent them. We talk about the hills every time, and then we go through the stories of the product and we demo the actual product as it is. The playbacks we start at the beginning. The very interesting one is playback 0. At playback 0, you have all of your design artifacts finished, or I should say that all of the storyboards. Everybody could articulate how you're going to take a hill very specifically, and engineering has weighed in and said, based on where we are, we think we can go do this. And then we move into our continuous delivery. By the way, this isn't waterfall. We're actually doing continuous delivery, but the achievement of a particular hill will transcend multiple releases. So we use this methodology, whether in some cases where we're delivering every day or two to the web, and a hill will span some period of time and any number of releases. And we also use this with our more traditional kind of on-prem software that we release 2 or 3 times a year. So that's kind of IBM design thinking. The other thing that you all might find of interest is we are about to release our new IBM product design language, a new HIG. And we hope that this set of human interface guidelines will become somewhat of a standard for enterprise software development. We're putting a lot of time and effort into it. We released it internally in December. We're kind of in a comment period internally. And then in March 31st, we're going to be releasing it to the world on the web. It will be available. We're hoping that our business partners and our clients and whoever would like to use it will use it. We have some work to do later this year around, we are developing a couple of new fonts that we're going to open source to the world and allow people to do that. But just to give you a little bit of sense, we're also going to be talking about our own new iconography and design language. And here's some mocks of some work. This is actually a mock-up of something that you might see something similar to this announced here pretty quick. This is a little bit of a pre-announce, but we're starting to apply the design language to our products. It also works for mobile devices. We're doing this globally. I talked about our Austin studio. We have people here from Hersley today, some of our designers from Hersley here today. We've been working with Hersley since 2013, and in 2014 we're opening a new 50,000-foot studio in our new IBM Watson building in Manhattan, in Silicon Alley in Manhattan, as well as Dublin and Shanghai this year. So to finish up here, just for about 5 minutes, I want to get, so that's kind of what we're doing. It's kind of how we're doing it and how we're thinking about it. We think a lot about talent plus practice equals outcome. Up until now, we've been worried about the talent plus practice. We're going to start seeing some outcomes in the real world. We started to see some in Q4, but more and more this year, you're going to start seeing some really, really, I think, beautiful and lovely and unbelievably usable and useful software from IBM coming out this year. 3 or 4 tactics I want to talk about for those of you. How do we collaborate? How do we do this? The first one is virtual errand. Erin, you'll see right there on the iPad, Erin is out doing research for 3 months, but she wanted to stay connected with her team in the studio, and so we actually went on eBay and bought an IV pole, and so what you see there is actually Erin's scarf and shawl that she always wore in the studio, and it shrouds her iPad, and she's on 24/7, and they roll around the IV cart. We have one of our industrial designers, true story, one of our industrial designers from our hardware group is actually now working to put that on a Roomba so that Erin can actually walk herself. But it's awesome because now her team, they walk around. It's like being in a hospital. They'll walk her around like this, around the studio, and she'll come by and say hi to me every now and then. But that's virtual Erin, and it's really been an amazing, there they are, there she is with her whole team working. Oh, really? It's a little robot. Yeah. So this is we're big. We obviously invested in the raw open space, but we're big. If you guys don't know the book Make Space, it came out of Stanford. If you guys are studio freaks like I am, and you love design studios and you love that stuff, Make Space by the Stanford D School is a wonderful book about just being real organic and being very real about making environments. It's a marvelous book. So we're real big on letting our designers build stuff. We also we had this particular project where these two teams, one in Austin, Texas, one in Littleton, Massachusetts, we had about an equal number of designers with different skills in both teams, and they wanted to create the common understanding, do the rapid interaction. This is just a normal problem. You got people in different places. How do you do it? This is just one thing that they kind of do. Every morning, especially during crunch times, they'll do daily kind of stand-ups, and every morning they'll do a video conference and an audio conference. What they found is that the audio conferencing capabilities of most, Skype and that stuff sometimes kind of is not very good. So they actually set up their own audio conference using, the Polycoms, and then a video conference just ad hoc around one of the tables. We have a couple of video conference spaces, but this is just ad hoc in the environment. At their tables. They spend whatever time together every morning. They review stuff from yesterday afternoon. They talk about what they're going to do today, and then they go off separately, and they don't worry about reuse. It's as if you had two people checking out code from a code line and just said, you basically have different challenges, but don't worry about overlap, just get your work done. And then they come back together at the end of every day for an hour, and they merge. Except they're doing this with design artifacts. That is the state of their equipment. They use Sharpies, they use Post-its, and that's a Ziggy cam if you don't know what that is. It's a high-definition, real-time camera, and they can point it right over artifacts. They can actually work in real time. I've got a picture. They brainstorm, they point to things at user flows, they do their sketching, and then they go away and do it on their own. If they're on their own and they want to share it, here's Alvaro, one of our visual designers. He's actually working in real time. That's the Ziggy cam hooked up to his computer. You'll actually see his pen in the computer screen. At the lower left corner, you can actually see that what's being projected there is from the Ziggy cam, and this thing can be shared. It's very efficient, and it presents and it shares out in HD to any number of connections peer-to-peer. It's a great little device. I think they cost $99. The Ziggy cam is kind of we've got 1 million of them, and then the other thing that they learned was that as they share their artifacts, print them out. Don't do them on the screen. Get back to the tactile world. So if they get something from the other studio, they'll actually print those things out. They'll put them on their wall as if they had drawn them on their own whiteboards, and then they'll start extending them and marking them up from there. The indent flows. These are things that typical artifacts. So the last thing is this, and we just ran a trial run of this 2 days ago, yesterday actually, our first trial run. So I had this idea. We ran the executive design camp, and this is a problem for a lot of us who are trying to communicate big, deep concepts like continuous delivery DevOps, and how does that work, and what does it mean with respect to design, and really big things that take some time to go deep on. And sometimes you have an audience that you actually need their support to get stuff done, but you don't have enough of their time to actually educate them on the devil's in the details in some of this stuff. Everybody buys off. There's not a person on earth that disagrees with continuous delivery. But it's your depth of understanding of the problems of getting there that will determine whether you actually give your team the support that they need to go do it. How do you solve that problem? So I had this idea about 6 months ago. I said, you know what we need in our executive design camp? We need a game. Somehow we need to turn IBM design thinking and the whole development process underneath it. So stating the hills, doing the design work to understand what it means to capture a hill, figuring out how we simulate somehow the fabrication or software development process so that we actually get to delivery or in a continuous delivery world. So I had this idea, can we make a game out of it? Well, it turns out, I was talking to my guy. By the way, my guy who runs ops for Design Camp would love this conference. He's very much experience related. He's very much like James. And he said, well, he goes, this is really interesting. He goes, because my game guild would love to work on that. I'm like, your game guild? He lives in Atlanta, and he actually goes to this coffee shop once a week of people inventing games. I had no idea. Now, he sent me some pictures of the game guild, and I'm not even sure they would fit in here. Like, it's an interesting crew of people that Sean has associated himself with. Anyway, they spent about 4 months working on IBM Design Thinking the game. We got its first play yesterday. This is just prototype cards. We're actually going to call it IBM Design Thinking the game. The code name for it, though, was Wild Ducks. And here is our game of IBM Design Thinking that we developed. And so the game of IBM Design Thinking has 3 fundamental things in it. It's got the product that you're building, how much it costs to build it, and what the ongoing revenue stream is for the product. It's got the delivery cards that you play as time goes by in the game. It's time boxed to each move is 1 minute, and you get 20 one-minute moves in the game. And then you have snag cards. So, for example, one of our snag cards, I don't know if I put it in here. Yeah, one of our snag cards, y'all may not know IBM, but a very senior person and really the guy that made the software group at IBM. An amazing guy is Steve Mills. And so one of the snags is an angry client, and you have to say the mantra, the client's mantra of, I know Steve Mills, you have to do my feature, over and over. and you lose your turn until certain things happen because you can't make progress because you have to do things because the client knows Steve Mills. So we have these cards that are snag cards. What we're trying to do is create in 20 minutes a simulated experience that actually teaches the lessons of it's good to have good design, but there are constraints. We understand that we have to ship software. We understand that there's a daily build or a weekly build or a monthly build or a quarterly build, whatever it is. Those constraints are real. And it's the allocation of resources and it's the investment that we make in doing a few things really, really well versus doing a lot of things to satisfy a bunch of one-off people. That's the real world. That's what we're trying to do at IBM, is to figure out how do we do a few things across a huge number of problems that we are addressing at IBM, but do each of those things that we do very, very well with a wonderfully and purposefully designed intention behind it. At the end of the day, our mission is to create an IBM and a set of products and services that work together. One of those things that we will do, that we've committed to do in this sense, is not just make our own stuff work together, but work together in your environments through APIs, for example. They need to work the same. We need to share some sort of a design language around that. And finally, they need to work for me. Works for me is kind of an awkward statement in this context. We've intentionally written this statement to be a statement from our clients and from our business partners' perspective, from your perspective. Why should you invest time and energy in working with IBM? Hopefully, it's because you believe that our products and services work better together, that they work the same, and that they work for me. That's my story. Thank you very much. Yeah, sure, go. Yeah. Oh, on the game, we haven't. As I said, we ran the very first iteration of it yesterday. In fact, I was just reading the post-mortem of it. We had 4 teams, just to be transparent. We had 4 teams do it at the executive design camp that was run in Austin yesterday. And what happens is the game is built so that a team of 5 or 6 people actually go through and make the strategic choices and play the game, and then you compare the results between all of the teams in the room. Because, of course, that's the way the world is. You've got a team of people building software, and they all have different perspectives. And they said it went very well, and that 3 of the 4 teams really felt like, there was something that clicked, and they kind of started to understand what we were trying to do. And one of the teams kind of got lost down in the mechanics of the game, as opposed to, staying above it. But we'll see. It's one thing we're trying. The other thing that we're looking to do this year is, I don't know if any of you all know, I think it's Scott McAdams. No, Scott Adams, but the guy that teaches cartooning, I think it's Scott McCloud. Exactly, yeah. So we're starting to talk to him about potentially doing a graphic novel of IBM design thinking and actually building a story with all sorts of tension and craziness into it. So we're trying to do different ways to engage our community in this. So, yeah, exactly. No, yeah. We are, if it works, the intention is that we will print thousands of these, and they will be available. And we actually have, again, just kind of, we didn't do it for this reason, but after it became a card game, because my conception was just a game, it became a card game. Well, there's actually a really interesting design reference. I don't know if any of you all know, but one of Charles Eames' famous, or Charles and Ray, actually, they did them together. One of their famous kind of artifacts that they delivered to the world, it was a set of cards. Do any of you all know the Eames cards? So if we print these, we're actually thinking about using a lot of references back to those cards. And it was called House of Cards, and they had slots in them, and you could actually build them, and they had all these amazing graphic images on them. So we're kind of thinking about making a design reference back to the Eames as well. Yeah? It's one of those things. It's not, but it's all we got. We have to ship. At 5 p.m. we got to ship. I mean, at some point there are just some constraints. We're now starting to think that probably at the very senior level we can communicate enough for them to get it. So at IBM, just to kind of put some names on it, kind of the senior vice president level, those all directly report to the chairman. At that level, it's plenty of time. And they've been through it, by the way, at that level, and loved it. Below them, general manager, probably enough time for them. Right below them, you're still relatively high up. These are our vice presidents of development across all of the groups. We probably need to go a little deeper there, because those people they're not necessarily in the weeds every day, but they definitely deal with issues that crop up out of the weeds every day. So we're still kind of tweaking that, but it's better than what we had, which was 0. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Are there any plans to extend the IBM design camp to IBM partners?
Yes, in fact, we've already started doing that. And the entry point for partners is through the product group that you're building on primarily. So, for example, if you're building on WorkLight or the mobile platform, come in through the WorkLight and mobile team. And we've already had some partners, and they come in and they sit side by side with the thing. This is one of the things we're doing here is I'm a huge believer in transparency. We're trying to make our processes as well as the actual things that we're working on in the release completely transparent. I put up that list of sponsor users earlier. We're bringing in users and giving them direct access to our wiki where we draft what we call our release blueprint. Every company has their own name. It could be called a marketing requirements document or whatever, but our users are intimately involved from the beginning. And so yes, short answer is yes. I'm getting the hook.
I don't know. I mean, indications are you don't. There was a lot of talk about IBM there, but I feel like at the scale they're at, it's kind of that wasn't really a pitch, and you were asking questions, so I guess it wasn't. Phil's around for lunch.
Yeah.
So great. Let's continue the conversation. I mean, because who else?
Look,
400,000 people to try and get to understand this shit.
I will tell you that
Good luck with that.
almost everything we are doing tactically, I did at Lombardi, which was a 200-person company, but we had developers in Austin, Texas, one other little gaggle of people in the U.S., and then a large offshore group in Ukraine. These are all things that we all put up with these issues. We have people everywhere. How do you deal with that? Because it's harder than if you don't have people everywhere. So,
thanks, Phil.
Yeah, thank you.
Design at scale.